When the Pine Hollow HOA slapped Ethan Caldwell with a 72-hour ultimatum to demolish his beloved cabin, they thought they had him cornered. Ethan, a sharp-witted property owner, wasn't one to back down. Armed with a little-known lease agreement and a knack for turning the tables, he hit the HOA where it hurt most, by tripling their rent overnight in a move that left the neighborhood reeling and the HOA scrambling to undo their mistake. Ethan Caldwell, a 38-year-old real estate investor, had owned a 10-acre parcel on the edge of Pine Hollow for nearly a decade. The land, nestled in a quiet corner of the upscale community, was his retreat from the grind of city life. On it, he'd built a modest cabin, a 600-square-foot structure with cedar walls, a tin roof, and a porch overlooking a small pond. It wasn't flashy, but it was his sanctuary, where he'd spend weekends fishing, reading, or just soaking in the silence. The cabin was fully permitted, built to code, and well-maintained, but it had become a thorn in the side of the Pine Hollow HOA, a group known for its iron grip on the neighborhood's aesthetics. Pine Hollow was a gated community of manicured lawns, sprawling homes, and strict rules. The HOA, led by Margaret Voss, a 55-year-old former corporate lawyer with a penchant for control, enforced a 50-page rulebook that dictated everything from shrub heights to paint colors. Ethan's cabin, though technically outside the HOA's direct jurisdiction, sat on land that shared a narrow access road with the community. The HOA leased a portion of Ethan's land, a 100-foot strip along the road, for $500 a year, a deal struck by the previous owner to allow residents easier access to the community's entrance. The lease was a minor detail to Ethan when he bought the property, but it would soon become his greatest leverage. The trouble started when Margaret Voss decided Ethan's cabin was an eyesore. She'd driven by it one morning, her SUV slowing as she squinted at the cedar structure. To her, it didn't fit Pine Hollow's polished image. She brought it up at the next HOA board meeting, where her allies, mostly retirees with too much time on their hands, agreed. "It's lowering property values," Margaret declared, her voice carrying the weight of someone used to getting her way. "We can't have a shack like that so close to our community." The board, including members like Carl, a retired banker, and Denise, a realtor with a sharp tongue, nodded in agreement. They decided to take action, assuming Ethan would fold under pressure. A week later, Ethan found a certified letter in his mailbox. It was from the HOA, citing an obscure clause in their rulebook about adjacent structures impacting the community's visual harmony. The letter demanded that Ethan tear down his cabin within 72 hours or face legal consequences. It was signed by Margaret with a handwritten note. "We expect full compliance, Mr. Caldwell." Ethan read the letter twice, his jaw tightening. He wasn't just annoyed, he was livid. The cabin was on his private land, fully permitted, and the HOA had no legal authority to touch it. But what really set him off was their audacity to threaten him without a shred of evidence. Ethan wasn't new to dealing with overzealous HOAs. He bought and sold properties across 3 states, and he knew how to handle bureaucrats who overstepped. He pulled out his property records, including the lease agreement for the access road. The agreement, signed in 2005, allowed the HOA to use the strip of land for vehicular and pedestrian access at $500 a year, renewable annually. Crucially, it included a clause that gave Ethan, as the landowner, the right to adjust the rent with 30 days' notice. The HOA had been paying the same rate for nearly 2 decades, never bothering to renegotiate. Ethan saw his opening. He called his lawyer, Rachel, a no-nonsense attorney who specialized in property disputes. "They're trying to bully me into tearing down my cabin," Ethan told her, explaining the letter. Rachel reviewed the documents and laughed. "They've got no leg to stand on," she said. "The cabin's on your land, and their rulebook doesn't apply outside their jurisdiction. But this lease agreement? That's your ace. You can raise the rent as high as you want, as long as you give notice. They need that road. Every resident uses it to get in and out." Ethan grinned, an idea forming. "How about tripling it?" Rachel paused, then said, "Do it. Just make sure you follow the lease terms to the letter." That evening, Ethan drafted a formal notice to the HOA. He typed it up on his laptop, keeping the language dry and professional. Pursuant to Section 4.2 of the lease agreement dated June 15, 2005, the annual rent for the use of the 100-foot access strip on Lot 42 will increase from $500 to $1,500, effective 30 days from the date of this notice. He printed the letter, signed it, and sent it via certified mail to Margaret Voss and the HOA board. For good measure, he emailed a copy to Rachel, who filed it with the county recorder to ensure everything was above board. The next morning, Ethan woke to a flurry of emails and voicemails. Margaret had received the rent increase notice and was furious. "This is extortion," she wrote in an email, copying the entire HOA board. "You can't raise the rent like that without negotiation." Ethan didn't respond. He knew the lease was ironclad, and he wasn't obligated to negotiate. Instead, he spent the day at his cabin, cleaning the porch and checking the roof for loose shingles. He wasn't about to tear it down, and he was ready for whatever the HOA threw at him next. By noon, 2 HOA board members, Carl and Denise, showed up at Ethan's cabin, their faces a mix of indignation and unease. "Mr. Caldwell," Carl started, his tone patronizing, "we're here to discuss this rent nonsense. You can't just triple our costs like that. The community relies on that road." Ethan leaned against his porch railing, his arms crossed. "And I rely on my cabin staying right where it is," he said. "You sent me a letter threatening to tear it down. I'm just protecting my interests." Denise jumped in, her voice sharp. "That cabin is a blight on Pine Hollow. We're within our rights to enforce our standards." Ethan shook his head. "Not on my land, you're not. And if you want to keep using my road, you'll pay the new rent, or find another way into your neighborhood." The conversation went nowhere. Carl and Denise left, promising to take this to the board. Ethan knew they'd be back, but he also knew they had no real options. The access road was the only practical way in and out of Pine Hollow. The alternative, a winding dirt path on the opposite side of the community, was narrow, poorly maintained, and prone to flooding. Forcing residents to use it would spark a revolt, and the HOA knew it. The 72-hour deadline came and went. Ethan's cabin stood untouched, and the HOA didn't follow through on their threat of legal consequences. Instead, they escalated. Margaret called a community meeting, rallying residents with tales of Ethan's unreasonable rent hike and his unsightly cabin. She painted him as a greedy outsider trying to fleece the neighborhood. Some residents, loyal to the HOA, bought the narrative. Others, who'd clashed with Margaret's rules before, were skeptical. One neighbor, Javier, a mechanic who'd lived in Pine Hollow for 15 years, pulled Ethan aside at the local hardware store. "You're stirring up a hornet's nest," he said, half smiling. "But I'm rooting for you. Margaret's been running this place like her personal kingdom for too long." The HOA's next move was to send Ethan a cease and desist letter, claiming the rent increase violated good faith principles. Ethan forwarded it to Rachel, who laughed again. "They're grasping at straws," she said. "The lease doesn't require good faith negotiations, just notice. You gave them that. If they don't pay, you can block their access." Ethan wasn't ready to go that far, not yet. Closing the road would mean barricading it, which could escalate into a bigger fight. But he kept the option in his back pocket. As the 30-day notice period neared its end, the HOA caved. Margaret, under pressure from residents who didn't want to deal with the dirt path, sent Ethan a grudging email agreeing to the new rent of $1,500 a year. "We expect you to maintain the road in good condition," she wrote, trying to salvage some authority. Ethan replied, "Road's in the same shape it's always been. Let me know if you want to discuss further." He knew she wouldn't. The cabin stayed put, and Ethan's rent increase became the talk of Pine Hollow. Some residents saw it as a brilliant power move, others as a petty jab. Either way, it shifted the dynamic. Margaret's influence took a hit, and whispers of a new board election began to circulate. Ethan didn't care much about the neighborhood politics. He just wanted to enjoy his cabin in peace. He spent the next weekend there, grilling fish he'd caught in the pond and watching the sunset from his porch. The HOA's threats had come to nothing, and the rent money was a nice bonus. Word of Ethan's payback spread beyond Pine Hollow, picked up by a local real estate blog that framed it as a cautionary tale about HOAs overstepping their bounds. Javier sent Ethan a link to the article with a note. "You're a legend, man." Ethan chuckled, but didn't let it go to his head. He knew the HOA might try again, but he was ready. The lease, the deed, and his stubborn streak were all the leverage he needed. For now, the cabin stood firm, and Pine Hollow had learned a costly lesson. Don't mess with a man who knows his rights.